edition, and there will be Saxon's users forum, which will be, what a surprise, led and moderated by Mike Kay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you've got lots of things that you want to say during this session, because if you haven't, it's going to be a very short session. I'm going to give you a very quick update on where we are with Saxonica and with the product line, and hopefully that will stimulate you to say, to ask questions about all the things I haven't said that are the burning issues for you. Introductions. I'm here from Saxonica, Michael Kay. My colleague O'Neill Del Prat, who's been working the last couple of years primarily on the Saxon C product, and my colleague Ankita Mohinta, who is our new marketing and commercial manager. And if you're a customer rather than just a user, then you've probably had dealings with Ankita, but you can now attach a face to the name. I now have to walk to find my... So, a short update on the state of the product, and then questions and discussion. So think about the burning questions that you want to ask. So first of all, the company, Saxonica, been going since 2004. In the early days, it was half consultancy and half product business, but the aim always was to establish a product business, and we got to that position fairly quickly. It's quite a while now since we've done any consultancy. I still think it would be nice to do some occasionally, but only if it takes us out for a few days, because it's nice to talk to customers. That's the nice thing about doing consultancy. As it is, we often have very little idea what our customers and users are doing. Perhaps that's something we can fix a little bit today. We're still at the level of 6 staff, which we've been for quite a while, but there has been a little bit of change. John Lumley, who's often presented at conferences like here, decided to take retirement. He took it a little bit slowly and reluctantly. He said he was going for quite a long time before he actually went. And even now he occasionally pops his head up and answers questions and helps us out with code that he wrote. So it's been a very friendly parting, and he's still around. Sue Schreiber was Ankita's predecessor as commercial and marketing manager. She also retired in 2020, but we still see her occasionally. She's organizing a Saxonica barbecue at the moment. She's become our social secretary. We're running at a turnover level of a little short of $1 million, about 900K last year. It's not rapid growth. I think it fluctuates more with the exchange rates than with anything else, because we get revenue in different currencies, and that fluctuates a fair bit. But the company remains profitable, and we're making healthy margins and able to invest back in the product. My aspiration for the company has always been that we would stay small, but we'd bring in enough revenue to support all the community activities that we do, as well as being able to support an open source model, as well as supporting a commercial business model. And that's been something that I rate as highly successful. My wife says I've failed in my objective of staying small, but 6 is still fairly small. We've got an office in Reading, UK, which is ridiculous. But it keeps me out of the house. Most of us are working at home, and working quite happily at home. It's become the normal way of working. So the product, well, I think of the product now in terms of 3 dimensions. What languages are we supporting? What platforms are we running on, and then the different editions of the product. And although it's 3 dimensions, that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean there are crosses in every box where those 3 dimensions intersect. we've renamed the platforms to get a consistent naming structure that reflects that three-dimensional sort of pattern. And so you'll be gradually getting used to seeing Saxon J, Saxon CS without the hyphen. So the first part of the product name reflects what platform it's on, and then after that, hyphen addition and so on. And I'll just say a little bit about what the state of each of those platforms is. So Saxon J, which is still very much the flagship product, the Java product. The last major release was in February. There have been a couple of maintenance releases since then. What was new in that release? Well, quite a lot of the things I talked about at Prague 2 years ago in terms of experimental new syntax and function library extensions. Those are not stable yet. I still class them as experimental. One thing that I haven't achieved over the last couple of years is to get a community group working to actually stabilize those specifications. And that's got to be high on my to-do list for the next year. Overlapping with that is improved JSON support, because quite a lot of those extensions are about making it more possible to support JSON. In particular, I quite like some of the things in the design about how you process JSON with template rules, using a similar sort of recursive descent model to the way you're used to doing with XML. One of Norm's contributions since he joined the company is to integrate the catalog resolution into the product. So he's produced a new version of the Oasis catalog resolver, and that's now very deeply integrated into Saxon, not just for accessing XML resources, but for accessing all other kinds of resources as well. So it's become more than just we did have a very sort of disparate model of how you handle different kinds of resources, and that's all been very much integrated into a single framework. So that involves redesign of a lot of the sort of callback APIs for resolving URIs, as well as the catalog infrastructure. And part of that, looking further down, functional interfaces for callbacks. A lot of those old Java callback APIs really needed modernizing, and we've taken a good hard look at those, made a lot of them into functional interfaces so you can provide callbacks for error reporting, URI resolution, all those sort of things in the form of Lambda expressions, which makes it read much more nicely. It's much more convenient than writing anonymous classes and so on. So we've, it sort of reflects a general policy towards moving forwards while retaining backwards compatibility, which is that we're nothing like as rigid about backwards compatibility as some people are, as the JDK are, for example. We try to modernize our APIs while retaining as much support for things that are likely to be used in the field as possible. But things do move forward, and I'm afraid moving forward from one Saxon major release to another is always a little bit more work than people would like, particularly if you've dived down deep. Because another of our policies is the whole question of should interfaces be public or private. We've tended to go for making it public if anyone might have a reasonable case for using it, rather than making it public only if we have 100% commitment to maintain it for all time. So we've tended to err on the side of letting you dive into the internals and getting your hands burnt if that's what you want to do. We've rewritten all the date and time handling to use, because the JDK updated all its date and time handling, all the way it handles time zones and things like that has changed in the JDK. They retain the old style, but we've moved forward onto the new style, which actually has some impacts in the way that time zones work. For example, the old JDK mechanism was very US oriented in its time zone handling, whereas the JDK is now much more international in deprecates US-oriented time zone names, for example. And another big internal thing is that we've moved towards all the internal string handling using our own string representation called UnicodeString, which it's basically a string model that firstly supports 8-bit, 16-bit, or 24-bit characters in terms of the number of bytes per character in the storage model. It gives us, regardless of whether you're using Astral characters or not, we can do direct addressing into strings. There's no surrogate pairs involved. And it's a string library that gives us efficient string concatenation without copying, efficient substring operations without copying, things like that. So a modern string handling library in there, which has had a few glitches in that some things have performed well and others performed less well, and there's been a few refinements on that in maintenance releases. But on the whole, it's worked pretty well. Then Saxon CS. First release of that was in October, and that actually came out on the 11 code base before Java did. So that's a complete replacement for the old Saxon product on .NET. It's built using completely different technology. Instead of using IKVM to translate the bytecode, we use our own transpiler to convert the source code of the Java. So it's still synchronized with the Java source code. Any bug fix we make to the Java applies equally well to the C#, but it's converted using a completely different mechanism. And that's supported on .NET Core only. So if you're familiar with the .NET world, Microsoft announced in 2019 that they were converging .NET Core and .NET Framework into a single line, which actually meant they were killing .NET Framework. It was just a polite way of saying it. So .NET Core is the future, and that's what we're now supporting. And this product doesn't run on .NET Framework, which of course is a problem for some users who haven't yet moved forward and don't necessarily yet have plans to move forward. So we're still supporting Saxon 10 on the old platforms. And currently Saxon CS is Enterprise Edition only, and people do ask me, is that going to remain the case? The answer is probably not forever. I'd like to fill out the matrix, but it's not an enormously high priority to produce a free product alongside the paid for one. But it probably will happen at some time. It's not the kind of product you can really make open source because the tooling is so proprietary. So it's not open source in the sense that people will be able to change the source code and rebuild it themselves. The product build process is so complex that we can't really ship it in a way that other people can build the product. And then the Saxon C. We produced a release of Saxon C in February, and this is the product that it's built using the Excelsior Jet Java engine currently, which means it's ahead of time compilation, so you get an executable out the back. And we deliver executables for a whole raft of different operating systems and hardware environments. And we deliver APIs on top of that for C++ and PHP and Python. So there's an enormous variety of configurations, which gives O'Neill no end of problems in people discovering configurations that they want to work, and he hasn't actually tested yet. So it's not like Java write once, run anywhere. It's much more the old sort of world that it only runs on the platforms that it's been tested on. That's the first release that was synchronized with Saxon J, so simultaneous release of the Saxon J product and the Saxon C product from exactly the same source code. It's the first time we achieved that. And a lot of improvements there in the design of the APIs, in support for multi-threading, in support for memory management. And there's localization support in there, isn't there, O'Neill? I think. And beyond that, yes, Excelsior Jet it's frozen in Aspic. It still works, but there's no further development on Excelsior Jet. You can't buy it anymore. There's no support on it. So clearly that's not a long-term viable solution. So what O'Neill has been working on since getting that release out has been re-engineering the technology to work on top of Graal VM. So that's what we're working on that front now. And then finally, Saxon JS. We haven't got our Saxon JS team here today. That's primarily Norm and Debbie have been working on Saxon JS recently. They decided to cut a maintenance release 2.4 in May rather than shipping all the new features that we've been developing over the last year. So there's a lot of things we've been developing for Saxon JS that we haven't shipped yet, that are targeted to come out in a 3.0 release sometime. But we never really plan dates. We ship things when they smell right. And we're not quite there yet. Possibly because there's such a lot in that product that it will take a while to get it all together and get it documented to a state where it's validated and quality product that we can ship. But there's a list of some of the things that we've already been developing that need to be integrated and tested and pushed into that release. And so that's it, really. And that's all you're getting from me. At that point, it's open for questions. Thank you, Moz.
Any question? Yeah. Gerrit Imsike, LETech. The question came up during lunch today, therefore I didn't submit it earlier. And it's about Saxon JS. And the question was whether the so-called XX compiler is also available in the browser or only in the Node.js version.
No, it's in both. Yeah, that works in the browser. If you use the FN transform, it doesn't have a direct API in the browser, but if you use the FN transform function from XPath, then that will compile a style sheet that you can then execute.
Excellent.
So I think one of the things on our shopping list for 3 is to have a JavaScript API to that compiler. Yeah. But it does run in the browser. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with it, that's an XSLT compiler written largely in XSLT, partly in JavaScript. That runs in the Node.js environment. It has a command line interface on Node.js, but it does also run in the browser.
Because this, for example, enables schematron compilation in the browser. So you can submit schematron schema, it will be compiled to XSLT.
It might be a bit heavy. How well it will perform is anyone's guess. I mean, a lot of it is just that these things are memory hungry. You might want to not do the compilation on the fly, but save the compiled output as a CEF file and reuse it. Because, I mean, the reason we had the compilation offline server-side to start with was that you really don't want to be running vast compilations. And schematron generated style sheets can be pretty big, can't they? So running, you wouldn't want to compile DocBook in the browser. It's just too big. But of course, memory is getting bigger all the time. Memory problems in the browser are far less severe than they were 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
Hi, and thank you. I'm interested in what are the differences in performance for the different platforms?
I don't have any really good metrics on that. And I think it's partly because we don't have the same measurement tools on different platforms. So it's hard to get results that are really comparable. Even if you're running on the same box, you find you've been measuring using different techniques, and in one case the benchmarking framework is using all the cores, and in another case it's only using one of the cores, and therefore you can't compare the results. So it is very hard to get comparable results. Also, some things are faster and some things are slower. Tends to be the way. I've tried a little bit comparing Java and C#. C# is still slower, and we don't really know why. It's a bit of a mystery. The code that we're generating looks perfectly good on the surface, and if you run micro benchmarks, then you execute a little bit of C# code and a little bit of Java code, and they perform roughly the same. But the aggregate performance that we're seeing, typically C# might be half the speed. So, something, and that might just be a measurement error. It's very easy to make measurement errors, quite gross ones. I mean, until last year, I was doing an awful lot of measurements on the laptop, and I discovered in a heat wave that it just depends on the temperature and the state of your battery and all sorts of things like that. So, performance measurement is a real black art, and I wish it wasn't. But yes, people get different results for different workloads. It does depend what you're doing. Have you got any feeling, O'Neill, for Saxon C performance?
Yeah, well, in terms of Saxon C, it is slower than the Java product. I must say that. But a lot of what really happens is when you're thinking of the API, you're doing the callback. So that's where it will suffer. So you sometimes have to make sure the applications you design, you're not doing so much of the callbacks back and forth. So you're just sort of limiting the going back into the Java world and coming back. But generally, people find it find it good compared to what's out there on the C++ side.
And the other thing on Saxon C is, of course, you get much faster startup time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So Java has this problem with warm-up time, that unless the Java VM is already warmed up, you have a 3 or 4 second delay before anything happens. Whereas with Saxon C being compiled ahead of time, the startup is much faster. So again, different workloads show different results. Saxon JS, I think there's, again, haven't really measured it, but the performance on Node.js feels good. The main limitation is asynchronous resource access, because of the way that the Node.js environment is in effect single-threaded. Doing things asynchronously becomes very important, and the JavaScript language is designed with callbacks and so on to enable that. The XSLT language isn't. So if you do a doc in the middle of your style sheet, we don't know yet how to run that asynchronously. We're designing new ways of doing asynchronous requests in XSLT, but we're having great difficulty finding a way of supporting the built-in XSLT language requests, which are sort of intrinsically synchronous. That's an issue on Node.js. There are ways around it, but it means if you just throw an existing style sheet at Node.js, then it might well be that gives you the problems.
You mentioned Graal VM.
Yeah.
Have you been looking at Graal VM and the Java implementation?
And
the Java implementation?
No, not currently. Currently, we're looking at it as a technology for re-implementing Saxon C. When we have done that, depending how well it goes, we can look at whether there's any case for making that available via Java APIs. What do you think on that, O'Neill?
Yeah, yeah. Just to add to that, initially, I did run the whole entire, I think the XSLT test suite, just using the Java product compiled to native, which runs fine. So, yeah, so it would be...
So it technically works.
It works, yeah.
It's a question of whether we want to support it and productize it and package it.
Yeah, because it's I tested it too, and it's really fast because you get the speed up on loading time. But often it's just a matter of adding a file into the Saxon to the jar, so it's possible for the GraalVM to pick up on the clues on what to keep, basically. So it's not necessarily a new product; it's enabling the old product.
Yeah, that there is some configuration files required to handle the reflection, and yeah, there is some work there, which we have, looked at and dealt with. So yeah, it's promising, and I think it's a big good step forward.
But of course, we are very thinly spread across different platforms, and the number of tests we have to run before a release is running into the millions, with a management hat on, we have to sort of decide how much can we afford to do. And even if it's a small technical step, it might involve a vast amount of testing. It also involves people becoming familiar with how to support it and document it and all those sort of soft issues. Okay, anything else?
I have one question. You mentioned asynchronous and XSLT.
Yeah.
And I have a question about asynchronous XSLT and maybe also interactive XSLT, because there was also work around
Yeah, they're
this.
related. They're related.
So, are you trying things? Are you trying to do some experiment in this area, and where are they?
Having had some fairly grand ideas about what to do, I'm now trying to implement those one bit at a time. So there's doing small steps first. Having thought about the big picture and where one might like to go, and realised that that's a long journey, it gives you a good feel as to what baby steps might be useful along the way. And the first one is to revamp the IXSL schedule action capability, which essentially says, do something asynchronously, and when it's finished, do this. So modernizing that to use a promises sort of mechanism, where currently you can only access certain resources asynchronously, generalizing that to the concept that there are asynchronous functions, and the set of asynchronous functions is open-ended, and users can potentially write their own asynchronous functions, and those functions return a promise, and then there's an action that happens on completion of that promise. The next stage after that is possibly that we integrate promises into the type system, so that we know that a function is going to return a promise, and there's type checking on it that it's going to do that. And then we start thinking about syntactic sugar to make it easier to invoke those mechanisms. A bit the way JavaScript has done, sort of await X, which is pure syntactic sugar for writing promises and callbacks. So we can look at syntactic front ends for that.
And do you see that as a thing we can retrofit also the streaming inside? Because awaiting a document is also, it could be a promise on the content of the document.
A streaming thing. I don't have great aspirations to do anything more with streaming at all.
Okay.
Partly because writing streaming code is an absolute nightmare. I mean, if writing byte code is hard, writing streaming code, and that's partly because of it's very hand to mouth is the way we do streaming. Our model for streaming is push-based. So we react to events coming in, and that means that we have a sort of manual inversion of our code, a sort of handwritten coroutine mechanism.
JSON inversion?
I mean, it's inversion in the sense of James Martin structured programming inversion, and coroutines, which these days are reflected with yield keywords and things like that in the modern programming language world. But we're writing with a language that doesn't have coroutines, and so we've effectively sort of implemented them by hand. And it's a bit like writing a bottom-up parser by hand. No one writes a bottom-up parser by hand. You generate one using parser generation tools. And if only we had a language that would generate coroutine code for us in Java, then perhaps it would all become a lot easier. But in fact, we've handwritten all the state machines in effect ourselves.
There is a GSR which is coming soon about that.
Is there? Well, perhaps we'll be able to throw everything away and restart them.
Yeah.
I still won't be.
It's called light thread in the GVM.
Right. Yeah.
And there are some tools around designing coroutines.
So yeah, it certainly would be nice to have that kind of infrastructure. Okay. And we'd have done it very differently to start with if it had been available. And if we'd known what we were embarking on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I'm actually interested in streaming. Is it heard? Okay. So I was talking with Muhammad earlier about streaming. I must admit I did not read the specification of XSLT streaming, so maybe the answer is there. So my question is about the class of queries that you can cover. So are you able to cover like queries that are not zero delay?
That are not?
Zero delay. So, for example, queries with filter or negated filters. So let's say I need to output the subtrees of an element A with a filter a child B. So at some point, we have to wait for that until we can output the tree. And
yeah, there are ad hoc mechanisms for doing that kind of buffering. Basically, you're only allowed one downward selection, but your downward selection can be to copy a subtree. And if you get to a particular node in the tree and say, I now want to copy a subtree, then it will swallow that subtree, put it in a variable, and you then do a non-streaming transformation on that subtree. So that's the mechanism that's there.
Okay, what do you mean by non-streaming transformation? So you keep it in memory and then...
An ordinary conventional tree transformation without any streaming constraints.
Okay.
So you just carve out a subtree out of your stream, and you can then process that subtree without restrictions, provided it fits in memory, of course.
Yeah, but in this case, you might have all the subtrees stacking up in memory until you can decide the answer.
And I mean, there are obviously scenarios that you can't stream at all, but it turns out to be quite a powerful mechanism. There's other things in there like things you can do with accumulators. Okay. For example, if your large streamed document contains a header section and then a body section, you can manage to capture the header section in a variable in memory, and it remains accessible for the rest of the transformation. So it's pretty ad hoc, but the most practical problems that aren't obviously completely unstreamable, like sorting, you can actually find a solution to it, but it's not always easy.
Okay, thank you.
So I still have one question too. It was about there was a tool, because it's about the question about how do we know something is streamable or not? And there was a tool by John Lumley at one point that was very interesting to use. to know beforehand, and
we haven't maintained that.
Okay.
It would be quite nice to dig it up and see if we can. It was never completely aligned with the final spec, but yes, it was. One thing John brought to the party was that he was pretty good at designing graphical things and interactive things, and that was a case in point. One thing he was bad at was finishing projects and documenting them.
You cannot be both.
You can't have everything.
Yeah.
So he was a man with an awful lot of good ideas, and he'd usually have another idea before he finished the previous one.
I know this problem.
It takes all sorts in this business, doesn't it?
So maybe a collective effort on that, or you want to?
Yes, it's something we should add to the list to see if we can polish that off. I mean, there's unfinished work. I'm criticising John, but I a few years ago reported at a conference on an XSD processor that I'd written in XSLT, and that's another thing that was almost finished but not quite. So sitting on the shelf, we've got an XSD 1.1 processor that's 98% complete.
Missing 2%.
Written in XSLT and therefore portable to the browser and things like that, which we should really dust off and finish, or even release without finishing it.
That's maybe a good idea.
That's the open source culture, isn't it? Don't bother if it's finished, just release it anyway.
Okay.
Anything else?
Okay.
Yes.
Ken.
One from Ken.
It's fine. It's fine.
Just because no one else was asking questions, is parallelism something in your plans?
It's not just in the plans, it's in the product.
Okay.
There are, again, I gave a conference talk on parallelism probably 5 years ago, and things haven't actually advanced all that much since. There are a number of things that run in parallel. Firstly, one of the simplest is the collection function. So if you use the collection function to process a set of input files, then they are all parsed in parallel.
Wow, okay.
So that's fairly straightforward. The next one, which is a bit less straightforward, is the result document instruction. So if you produce multiple result documents, then each one is produced in parallel.
Okay.
Which
is that only in the EE version, or?
I'm sorry?
Is that only in the EE version?
Yeah. That's Enterprise Edition. And if you've got that kind of workload that's got multiple input documents, multiple output documents, which is not that untypical for a publishing workflow, then it can give you, 3 or 4 times speed up on the total process. And then the other thing that we've got, which is under manual control, is that XSL for each has an option to be multi-threaded. But that's entirely under programmer control.
Okay.
And if you misuse it, then it will make your performance worse rather than better. So you've got to work out whether it's, where in your style sheet.
But throwing a tree at a bunch of template rules.
Yeah, we haven't done it in apply templates, and there's a reason for that I can't remember. I did it at one stage, and then found that something broke, and I pulled it again, and I can't remember what broke, but it was something that was fairly difficult to fix. Otherwise, I'd have fixed it. But yes, I mean, you can obviously work around it by doing an XSL for each, and then apply templates to the current thing.
I suppose. The only reason I asked was in the classroom I would talk about the opportunities for parallelism, and I'm delighted to hear that if
one of them, yes, I remember the reason. You can statically tell whether XSL for each is using the last function. You can't statically tell whether XSL apply templates is using last.
That there's a match using the last, yeah.
You only discover dynamically that one of these templates wants to know how many things you've applied templates to, and then you're completely thrown because you've no idea. So I think that was the stopper on it, which is completely silly. We could just have a rule that says if you do apply templates with multi-threading, then you're not allowed to use last. But yeah, so things like that in the spec can end up scuppering you.
Well, thank you for taking the time.
Okay.
In that case, I'd like to wrap up by saying thank you to all of you, especially for using our product, especially those of you who submit bug reports. Because without people who submit bug reports, the product would be a lot lower quality than it is.
Thank you for your patience when a bug report is.
So we thrive on bug reports. We thrive especially on bug reports where someone has gone to the effort of finding out exactly under what circumstances it fails and giving us an easy repro that we can prove to ourselves that they're not an idiot and that it really does fail. And we like solving them, and we like solving them quickly enough to ensure that no one else hits the same bug. So thank you to those of you who submit bug reports. Thank you especially to those of you who actually pay for the product, because you are contributing the good stuff to all the other users who don't, which is how the whole ecosystem keeps going. But thank you as well to those who don't pay for the product, because eventually you'll find that you want to, and you'll persuade your management to fork out, and that's what keeps the whole thing going. So it's been a very successful business model that mixes an open source community with a commercial community, and that's worked extremely well for us, and I hope it works well for all of you, whether you're paying customers or not. So thanks, and thanks for being here this afternoon. It's been a long day.
Thank you. It's time for the dance, no? No. So should we?
Just end this.
Yeah. So you will be closing. Yeah. You bring. Oh, okay. So maybe we're closing earlier. So I think maybe next time we will be a bit more careful about the planning. Thank you very much all for showing up. Welcome. Thank you very much. We're very happy to see that. It was a lot of work for everyone except me, and really we're happy. And now we have a twin conference, so it's very important. So we have to care about each other a bit more. Yes, exactly. It's there. Markup UK. So next year. Well, you know, we're trying a lot of things in this conference. We try to test things. So if you have any ideas, it's kind of, you know, on progress and agile way of organizing this conference. So if you come up with some idea, maybe we'll implement it sometimes or not. You know, that's the point. So any ideas is welcome, and of course spread the word. We need to have more people presenting papers. So you see that people presenting papers is a certain amount of work, but we are friendly here, I think so. Maybe?
Right, usually.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's a wish, and we want this wish to happen, but that's...
talk before you go grey.
So the more the people can present and extend the area of the topic, the better we are. Maybe you have some ideas on that? Yeah.
Just submit proposal next year or next time. It's easy.
Yeah, more proposal. We can help you finding subject topics if you need some help. We don't write papers for you, of course, because yeah.
The reviewer comments were wonderful.
You're welcome. Obviously, it was not me because I never do review. It can confirm. It's not a joke.
I wouldn't go into such small details.
Yeah, you're right. And so thank you very much, and travel safe to home, and enjoy Prague if you stay a few hours or days more, because lovely weather. And we hope to see you at any conference, markup, visible or invisible or whatever, in the future. So next one I think is balisage, full remote. I don't have any news about summer school, so if you hear about summer school. Okay, so it's happening, and the website, you have to go to the website to have the information, right? It's supposed to be in September? September 11th, it's my birthday, great, okay. Good to know. Okay, Okay. No, wait. Important information.
And now I've finished, thank you. Yeah, if you have any colleagues who want to know more about XML, this thing you keep banging on about, who want to have a bit of a hands-on introduction, it's a bit quieter this year than in previous years, and because for obvious reasons, but it's still going ahead, and it's a lovely time, and a chance to go punting in the Isis River in Oxford, and it would be lovely to see some of you or your colleagues there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So very important information, so XML Summer School, and then there will be Declarative Rotterdam. No, Amsterdam. I'm confused. Declarative Amsterdam in November. 7? 6 and 7, 2 days. And after that, so behind, over there, Markup UK. Okay?
There will be lockdown in between, probably.
Sorry?
There will be lockdown conference in between.
Yes.
Quite likely.
Very good. Okay, so see you all. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.